Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the RE Human Layer Security podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Jenny Radcliffe, also known as the People Hacker. Jenny is a world-renowned social engineer and expert in the art of negotiation, deception, and persuasion. And Jenny consults and trains organizations on people hacking and is called upon to psychologically pen test companies, finding weaknesses in their security measures and helping them build their human defenses. I'm told that she can talk her way into a secure building and spot a psychopath at 100 paces, which is no mean feat. And on the Jordan Harbinger show recently, she was called a burglar for hire, an ethical con artist, and a pro at breaking an entry. Jenny, hello, and welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast.
Hi, thanks for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Jenny, that is quite the CV. Let's just start here. What is a people hacker? Can you describe your job to us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's people are familiar with hackers, technical hackers, and I guess that people who are not in the industry have this image of usually a lone male in the black hoodie, in front of all these huge computer screens. And so I put people hacker in front of it because although I am hired by organizations to test their security, it's done either through physical infiltration. So that's the burglar for hire bit. I've been breaking into buildings and getting past security since I was really a little kid. So there's that side of it. But the people hacker side is the persuasion side. It's the psychology. It's talking my way in. It's getting people to tell me things that probably is to the detriment of them and their organization, except for the fact that I'm an ethical hacker and we're doing it as an education piece to show their weaknesses, to patch it, to make sure that the real bad guys can't use the same methods to get past. So that's the job. There's a lot of investigation work in there. And there's a whole, when you do that introduction, there's a whole raft of skills that come under that sort of people hacker bracket, that title. And as you say, things like negotiation, deception work, and all of those things. Clients come to me and ask me sometimes, can you find someone in our team maybe who we think is not 100% right? Maybe there's some issue going on, there's something, and I know we're going to look at it later, but it's the clients that came to me and asked me to look and see what I could do from a perspective of being able to read people so well. How can that be applied for security and beyond? So really, that's really the job. It's hard to put it in a nutshell, but yeah, that's it.
I was going to say there's quite a bit for us to unpack there. Maybe we should actually go to how did you get into this? How did you get started with being a people hacker?
Yeah, it's not something you can study. I mean, certainly not then. And even now, it's difficult. There's no real formal route into being a social engineer, into being someone with these skills. So I was mostly self-taught in terms of things like deception work or body language or linguistic analysis. But like to get into the job, I sort of did it before it had this title of social engineering, or before I really connected it with security. I mean, I've told the story many times, but growing up in Liverpool, I had a few weird things happened to me. It was a rough sort of neighborhood at the time. And I ended up sort of hanging out with my cousins and my family. And they were sort of looking into abandoned buildings and not really to take anything or break anything, just because it was there and it was abandoned. And I've spoken all over the world about this, and people always say, oh, we did that. There was a haunted house in our neighborhood. And we always, as kids, we got into the house and had to look around. But I made a career of it because eventually people started to ask me, long story short, people started to ask, well, can you look at our business? If you can get into a locked building, can you get into this building when it's locked? Or can you talk your way past our reception staff or our security guards? And I was also asked a lot by various sort of law enforcement and sort of other, in quotation marks, to take things. So not just to get in to prove I could get past security, but could I get in and take something or plant something in a building? for various reasons, all come under the bracket of security. And so to do that, I was always sort of good with people, but I realized that I needed to up that skill. And so I studied things like anthropology, and I studied things like linguistics, and I studied deception work, and interviewing skills and observation skills. I did things like train my peripheral vision for hours and hours and hours. And so it was anything I could do that would make me better at analyzing, reading, kind of profiling people. And there's nothing out there, even now, that teaches most of those skills. I teach them when we're not on lockdown, but only to a very small amount of people, because they're pretty potent stuff in the wrong hands,
So I have a ton of questions now about all of these skills that you use, and I'm sitting here thinking, hey, I want to learn some of this too. Could you maybe, before we go there, like, what is a typical job then? And it sounds like maybe that's evolved from when you started doing this, or you started kind of getting into this world of, being a burglar for hire, to where it is now. And maybe things have got more sort of sophisticated and I don't know, more kind of fancy in their scope. But it would just be really good to hear, what a typical job is, if there is such a thing, and how that's evolved through the years.
I mean, of course there isn't. That there's no such thing as a typical job. But if you were to kind of look at the most typical sort of thing, I mean, there's a whole industry now of penetration testing, security penetration testing, and I still do some of them when we're not in lockdown. I still do some of those, which is just a client. I mean, I don't do so much of the standard corporate pen test that there's a lot of competition for now. I mean, can you get into the office, make a cup of tea, print a document, leave a pineapple or something in the office. I mean, I do that sometimes, but we tend to get more jobs where it used to be a high security facility. There'll be a particular area they want us to try and get into, or in fact nothing. There's no particular task. Just what can you do? What can you find? Because sometimes a fresh set of eyes inside your building, inside your facility, finds things that you didn't think was a threat. And just to give you an example of that, I was inside a government building, couple of years ago, and my brief was to get into a certain secure area, which we'd done, and then we had like half an hour left to keep walking around, or to get out. Now I normally would get out quite quickly, but I had a feeling about this building, and I kept looking around, got into a couple of offices that were empty or almost empty, and just saw what I could pick up off desks. And what I actually found was some very confidential documents and plans, including the layout of some should we say key national buildings and their emergency escape routes and things like that. And I should not be able to get hold of those things. I should not be able to get in. And even inside the building, it should be segmented, right? Just like in technical security, it should be least access all the time. And so it's that type of thing. It's like, can you get in? Can you take this? Can you leave something behind? Can you get into a secure area? So on the physical side, it's kind of that. But that's often combined with, can you get, what picture can you build from open source intelligence or from talking to people of what's going on in the organization? So there'll be a lot of that. And that, psychologically, how can I persuade enough people in that organization to give me enough information for me to put together, a simulated attack? Sometimes we don't even do the attack. I just say, I was going to do it with the crew. So there's that. And I actually do an awful lot of interviews and analysis on teams, because it is an increasing thing that there's a problem on the inside, and to find out who's causing that issue, maybe why that's happening, and how big that threat is something that comes up a lot. So there's all of that. And then I'm asked to speak about this all the time, because it is, it's my sort of my life and my story. It's hard for me to I say it so many times on interviews and things, that it's hard for me to really appreciate. I can see that it's an interesting story, but it's mine, so it feels normal to me. But I'm asked to talk a lot on podcasts and to speak a lot about the psychological side and the human side of security. And now I got into this because people starting to realize that the bulk of attacks have this huge human element in. And all this huge cyber security industry that we're both in, that we're all in, it's so dependent on controlling and helping the human side of things. And so I'm asked to talk a lot about that, and I'm interviewed a lot about that as well. So there isn't a typical day, but there are common elements. And the common elements are, can we get past the humans?
Yeah.
Can we get past the physical security? And why is that the case?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We just put out a report on exactly this topic, which is how to hack a human. And part of what the report covers is all the information that people share online and how that can be used to actually, form things like phishing scams, impersonation attacks, those kinds of things. And if we just go back to what you were saying before, which is fascinating, all these different techniques that you use, could you give us some examples? Again, we've established there's no such thing as a typical job, but what are some of these techniques you use? How do you, when given a brief of you've got to infiltrate this building or infiltrate this team or find a way in, expose the vulnerabilities, like where do you start?
So I think if we talk about the people rather than the buildings, right? Because from a building's point of view, I mean, they're so connected. But generally speaking, what we'd be looking at, I would want to know everything about a target organization, right? So I would want to know things like the history of that organization. So how did it start? Was it, were there a couple of founders that built it up from scratch, or was it, public-private? And how did that happen? How did it evolve? And when I start there, when I'm asked questions like this, people are really surprised. Like, you need to know that much? Like, yeah. Because what I'm trying to do is uncover the personality, the beating heart of that organization. What makes it tick, right? What are the things that it loves? What are the things that it doesn't like? I sort of treat an organization and the people within it as if it was one entity. And I really need to know that entity really well. And then from a physical point of view, I'd be looking at the way people move around the building, where they go to celebrate, where they go to share secrets, all the secret things that the employees of any organization does, because I really want to know and understand the personality of that target. And then within that, I'm going to look at the teams. I'm going to look at where people congregate. And I don't just mean officially, I mean unofficially. There are unofficial sources of power in every organization, and there are unofficial sources of news in every organization, because there'll always be someone who knows everything and knows everyone and communicates it freely. So we're really looking to know that company almost as well as someone who works there, maybe better. And one of the pieces of advice I always give is know your organization better than the bad guys. Know your people really well. Know when you spot something that's out of sync and out of line, right? So we look at all those things, and only when I've got that amount of intelligence and that amount of knowledge do I then think about, right, which person or which, small group of people are we going to target to really pump for information and spearfish. Because when I do that, I want that attack to sniper fire hit home, right? It's not a scattergun approach. I'm going to really target an individual, make sure that whatever I say, whether it's on an email or a vision call or in person, is going to resonate so much that they can't help but respond. And then to do that, what I'd be looking at with those people are, what do they protect? What do they love, right? What are the things what's the last thing they give up? And really connect with those passions and those motivations in an individual. Similarly, what do they hate? What are they frightened of? What do they run from? And you can see when I say this how evil it sounds, because it's so manipulative. Because then if I put that together with some local knowledge, establish some trust and some authority, and use all these kind of influence persuasion techniques, that person really is pretty bare when we send that email or we make that connection. And I will build it over time. These are patient attacks. So if you put all of that stuff together, we're using strategic sort of intelligence collection, we're using tactical knowledge, and then we're using personal psychological traits of an individual to get to that person or to get to that group of people. That is a pretty precision attack. But what I don't hear a lot of in the industry is people doing the same thing. So there's a lot of the time in the industry, it's, it's a pretty generalist attack. I mean, there are still people who think what I do is put on a cheeky smile and tailgate into companies. Well, I do that sometimes, but it's a little bit more sophisticated, just the word you used. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that, and it's a lot more preparation. And that's because the targets that we deal with and the situation, the problems I'm given to solve are fairly complicated. So yeah, so that's how, I suppose that's a broad answer, but that's how we do it.
So it sounds like a ton of work goes in up front. When you've done that, how easy is it normally just to crack into the organization or hack that person that you're trying to get past? And I think there was an example you gave on another podcast that you were on, where you were saying that the desire for people to be helpful or polite often kind of overrules any security training they might have been given. And I think the example was where you'd either hurt your hand or you'd faked an injury and you were trying to get through the hand scanner. And because you sort of said, hey, ow, my hand, it's like, I can't put it on the scanner. The person you were talking to was just like, hey, right this way, like, we don't want to cause you any distress. And that's how you got in. Is this like a common thing you see where actually people are just, you push that kind of awkwardness button hard enough and everyone's willing to crumble and say, actually, forget the protocol, you can go through?
Do you know what? It's cultural and it's contextual, right? And what you need to understand is to know what works, that's why you said it's a ton of work. That ton of work gives you the answer, right? That's what makes you know what works. So the example you're talking about, I was in a bank in Germany and they'd asked me to get through and into the top corridor of the C-suite and do a few things up on the C-suite. And once I was past this kind of door with it, like you say, with the biotech lock, it was easy enough to do that because one of the things you need to understand about buildings and organizations is if they think they've got great perimeter security, then everybody inside the perimeter is often very slack, right? Because if you've managed to get past the security on the perimeter, then you must be okay. So I kind of banked on that as well. I knew if I got past this one biotech lock, this one door in the bank, it'd be fine. But how it works is that I knew from research that they were a very, and I mean, I don't know this, you assume a certain amount of things, you test your assumption, which is why you need a plan B, C, D and infinite. But it was in Germany. I expected to be, it was the financial industry, it was a bank. Very, this isn't like a normal high street bank. This is a very exclusive kind of financial institution, I guess. Extremely posh, very kind of ornate reception and everything. And the last place that you would want a noisy person swearing and kind of causing a fuss. So there's that. Also assuming, and it's a little bit like the UK, the confrontation would be something that wouldn't be wanted in that setting and perhaps in that culture. And I'm testing that, right? So Mediterranean would be different, as presumably, right? So I've done jobs in Italy and Spain and places like that, and they will argue with me. Lovely people. My family way back are Italian, but they're not bothered about having a robust discussion in public. But in England, we don't really like that, and especially not in a bank. So you're looking at the macro context as well as the context of the situation, and then tactically on your feet adapting. And yeah, I mean, I wrapped a hand up to pretend I'd really broken my arm, really, so that I had a plausibility when pushing my fingerprints onto the biotech lock that it wouldn't open for that reason. That I wasn't pushing it down hard enough. But when the security guard came and pushed it down harder to say, you really need to give it a good press, I could sort of say, ow, get off my arm, ow, that hurts, But it was more that I knew that they wouldn't like this fuss. And so I was dropping files and swearing very loudly and just creating a situation that very much jarred against the atmosphere that they wanted to create. Now, what I'm also counting on at that point is that I look innocent, or at least I don't look like a criminal. I kind of blend very well. And it's the key to a lot of kind of security work is to blend. So I don't really stand out in any way as different to your sort of rank and file employees in a building. So what you really have got is someone who's trying to get through a door, who's causing a bit of a fuss, probably looks okay. And in that situation, sort of fingers crossed that they were going to let us through, and they did. Different situations would be completely different. Female security guards, for example, I find are a little bit less naive when it comes to a female social engineer, so women. And it's not really a sexual thing or anything like that. It's just that they know that I could still be dangerous even though I don't look like a burglar type of thing. And I've been stopped by more female security guards, if they're there, than I have by men, which is a really good argument for diversity in our security workforce, by the way.
It is indeed.
Because they sort of really look at me, really show me. I had one lady and she took a pass off me, a female security guard. And the pass was not me, right? So it's just to flash up. It just looked vaguely like me. We'd had to substitute her at the last minute because the one I'd faked, I'd spoofed one and there was an issue. And she looked at it and she knew it wasn't me. And she went, go through. And she let me go through 4 steps before they locked me in between 2 doors. So I was completely scuppered then. Yeah. So it depends.
And have you, like, in that vein then, so how many times have you been caught in the act? And it's like you're found out, or you're stuck, or you need to call for help. Do you have somebody that you have to call for help? Do you have a number? So
we have a get out of jail free letter, which I have 2. I have one with the number of the office, so that they can fall at the final hurdle, right? So we say, This is a security test. Call the number and it'll confirm. When they ring, it'll call my office. It'll say, yes, she's absolutely fine, let her go. And they do often fall for that. But yeah, I always have backup. I mean, in the early days, and if you listen to that podcast that you said, to Jordan Harbinger's podcast, there were times when I didn't.
Yeah.
And I was completely flat and particularly dangerous when I was in Asia and places like that and breaking into buildings on my own. But I've learned over time, obviously now it's a very professional setup, Tim, and I always have someone I can ring in case I do fall off a roof or whatever, most of the time anyway. But how many times? I've been stopped and I've been turfed off sites lots of times, but I'm often asked, have I ever failed? And in my head, a failure would be if I didn't complete the job. And we would always go back and complete the job.
Right.
And so in that sense, I would say not fail, but caught lots of times. We do a lot of different things. We send in disposable B teams first. So security distracted and think they've caught our firm. And then I'll go in separately. We do things like that. But generally speaking, I've been stopped loads of times. I've been locked in offices and with guard dogs and I've been I've been just told to sit down, in like canteens or something, and sat with like a person, an employee, and you go like, can I just nip the loop? No. So yeah, but less in recent years than in the past. So yeah.
And this is the question I've been dying to ask you, which is, like, in all these scenarios you put yourself into, and even just, the story about how you get past the security guards in the bank. How do you hold it together? How do you keep yourself in that, almost in character? Because I guess you are basically taking on the role or identity of this imaginary person. What are your tricks for doing that?
I think it's just, do you know what? It's a really good question, that, and it's not really one I've been asked. I think what helps you hold it together is probably at that point it is confidence. It's your preparation and it's confidence, and confidence that you can do the job, and confidence comes from preparation coupled with experience, really. And I think it's that I know that there's almost, I've done it so often, I don't feel as if there's a situation that come up that I couldn't handle. Now, that's not true, but I have to believe that when I'm in the building, right?
Yeah.
And for people who come on, and when I say something like that, I often get youngsters say to me, but how can I can't get, I won't be like that when I don't have experience. So how does it work? And I say, well, because you'll build to it, and to do that, you have to sort of act like a social engineer, even when you're not inside the building. So you have to learn to speak to people and get information from them. I can chat to anyone, and I do. I chat to people on trains and things, and you kind of live and embody your different personas. Maybe test out if you're going to go in and you're going to say that you're maintenance, then test out that story. Talk to someone. Like, we can't do any of this at the moment, but talk to someone on a train, and when they ask what you do, tell them your pretext and rehearse that pretext. But it's that type of thing that I think you need to be able to kind of have some fun with it, and to practice it, to get into that zone where you're confident you can handle anything, where you can switch. And I always did think that the job lent itself to a certain amount of theatre and a certain amount of fun. And I think that's what attracts people to be social engineers, because everybody wants to do it. Is because they know that if you get good at it, you get that kind of...
I want to switch gears slightly to a topic you mentioned earlier, this concept of insider threat, and some of the jobs that you're asked to do, some of the things that you're asked to work on, are where there is a suspicion, or there is there's an understanding that actually somebody in a team or an organization has gone bad. What's your definition of insider threat? What actually is this?
It's difficult because there's a few different ones. So I talk about 4 M's, right? You've got people who make mistakes. So unwillingly, unknowingly, without malice, have done something that opens the organization up. And that can be anything from these ridiculous photographs that you see online, your corporate websites. There's the team raising money for children in need, and in the background I can now see the notice board, and zoom in a little bit and see a few passwords or whatever it is, and it's not usually passwords. It's normally not that easy, but there'll be information. You don't forget, a social engineer is always trying, a criminal social engineer is trying to pull pieces in for the research all the time, to build this picture, to look for that one chink in the armor, right? That little gap that we can use and exploit. So there can be people just completely, unwillingly reveal something, right? So I call mistake. And really that's generally, it can be no one's fault. It can just be an oversight. So sometimes it's just a gap in operational procedures or whatever. And we can mend that. Security teams can often mend that. So they might never, that's just a mistake. But then you've got malice and mischief. And malice is the worst one, really. And that's because that's when someone is inside the organization, deliberately working towards its downfall. And that can be, for money, or it can be for a cause, and the cause can simply be, I am no longer happy with this company. And what customers, clients overestimate is the amount of loyalty people have to the people they work for. Loyalty doesn't come with a paycheck. Loyalty comes with caring about that person and understanding that person and sympathizing with that person. But we can only do that so far as employers. And there comes to a point when people have to take responsibility for themselves and have to be reprimanded for things. And, and people can really turn. And in more, cases of IPR or infrastructure and things, it can be someone who's only ever gone to work for that company with the sole purpose of sooner or later selling IPR and that type of thing. So that's malice. And then you've got that middle ground of sort of mischief, where people are kind of open to kind of not really being a company man or woman, but it's not quite as serious as deliberately trying to cause the downfall of the company, but it still is working against the company, in some way, shape or form. Usually not the company itself. It's represented by a manager. Usually it's usually a person that, like, that level of kind of mischief is directed towards. And then the fourth one is money. So if there's cash in doing something wrong, then people have a price generally. So what you're looking at is, and people say, oh no, I don't have a price, but we all do. And I don't mean that, there's people say, no matter how much money you offered me, I wouldn't do X, Y, Z against the company. Well, no, but then if they got to you in another way, so if there was a way, it's a carrot and a stick. Maybe if they mentioned your family or the things that you care about, or you had a secret that you didn't want made public. We all have things that we prefer to keep private. Well, those are the things that go on to make someone into an insider threat. It's those are that's a psychology, if you like, behind how someone becomes a threat on the inside. Yeah,
I was going to say we don't often hear about that that risk of people being turned malicious, or people being turned as insider threats. Right? We often just think about people wake up one day or over a period of time go bad, or like you said, they make a mistake. But actually, what you're saying here is that it can be even more complex, where they might just one day they may be being influenced by a threat actor outside of the organization.
Absolutely. I mean, I would be looking for someone who was chatty, maybe someone who wasn't so happy. And, you've got to, I mean, I read one, there's a lot of nonsense written about this. I read a report, someone has obviously heard me say this, and I read a report that said they announce on social media that they're not happy with the company. No, that's not what I mean. If you're going to plagiarize accurately. What I said was, you can look at linguistically what people say. And people can, things like, I mean, I remember we pinpointed one guy once because it was always, thank God it's Friday, right? Oh, thank God it's Friday. Going out with my mates to the pub to have a few drinks, thank God work's done for another week. And there was just this weariness and this, it wasn't bitter, but he was always happy to be out of work. He was always happy for the weekend, living for my holidays, counting the holidays. Oh, this is on social media, counting it down the holidays. And all the memes and everything and all the little, or anything he posted was always about, being exhausted, work being terrible, not being paid enough, sharing articles about, people who won court cases and things against their employer. So what you can do is you can sort of put that together. And again, it's hard work to do it and think, this is someone who's not completely happy. So can we start to create a relationship? Can we turn this person, maybe by, fake job offers and talk to, pretend to be a recruiter and getting to know them and all those things. You're looking to build up a picture of somebody who might be open to talking too much about the company, or, if you're a criminal, if you're a bad actor, eventually, doing something that was criminal against the company, or that was, even if not criminal, certainly bad for the organization. But the idea for a criminal on the outside is, why would I try and get past all your technical measures, the firewalls and the anti-malware and everything else, if I can get someone on the inside who's for the cause? And if you can persuade someone to do that willingly, that's very strong. But there's always, for a criminal, there's always blackmail and bribery. So it's those things. Companies are so naive that doesn't go on. Of course it goes on. And if you can get someone with an issue, maybe an addiction, an affair, something like that they really don't want out in the open. Let me give you an example. There was an organisation I worked for in London, and they'd had an awful breach that had let some very dangerous information, very hateful information for people out. And we eventually traced it back, and it was a cleaner, and the cleaner was part-time, and they threatened her because told her that there was problems with her status as an immigrant into this country, which wasn't true, and given her 6 months' wages in cash. All she had to do was pick up some bits and pieces off a few desks. That's very, very cruel thing to do to someone, but also very persuasive. And, you breached, and everything that they had in place to stop that was pointless at that point, really.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Tessian, we talk a lot about people being the gatekeepers to the most sensitive systems and data in an organization today. And still, I think generally in the cybersecurity world, there is a tendency to think towards the technical aspects of how you secure an organization versus, hey, all this enterprise digitization that you've done over the past 40 years, great. It's empowered people to be able to do more, access more, or your patient data is no longer in the basement in the filing cabinets. It's in this one Excel file or this one database. And if it gets leaked, then it's all gone. We're not thinking enough about how we actually secure people in those 35,000 decisions they have to make every single day to make sure that every one of them isn't either a mistake, isn't malicious, or isn't them being tricked. Now, you said that organizations have kind of got to wise up here. They've got to think about this and take it more seriously. how can they go about assessing this risk or preventing these kinds of things from happening, short of hiring somebody like yourself to do an analysis for them?
Well, the first thing I'd say about that is that there's two parts of it. The technology that we've got in terms of security and all the measures that we put in place, it's not useless. It makes it much harder, right? And so we absolutely have to work with the humans in tandem with technical solutions. Absolutely, we do. And it's not that I'm saying they're completely useless, because it's not that they're completely useless. You can limit access. You can see when someone's found something and track it. All of that. Detection stuff and prevention of it getting to a human in the first place is great. But I think the issue is that can be bought and implemented easier than it is to fix your culture and to really understand the way people work. People are not something. This issue of insider threat and of culture generally, security culture generally, isn't something you can throw money at. It needs time, and it needs attention, and it needs focus. And really the answer to insider threats and just generally becoming more secure as an organization in terms of the humans is knowing your humans better than the bad guys, like I said at the start, said earlier on. And that means at line manager level, because if you've got a huge organization, and one of my clients has got 97,000 employees globally. And when I said you've got to know your humans, like there's 97,000 of us. And I'm saying, yeah, but at line manager level, a team leader level, you have to really understand your people, because if you don't do that, I will, right? I will go in and I will find someone who is, chatty or unhappy or naive or new, and I will find a way to get to them. So you've got to be able to see when that person is behaving differently. That person needs to know that they can come to you if they feel like there's something amiss, if they feel like there's something, they've been asked something that's not right or that doesn't chime well with them. And especially now we've come away and we're all working from home. It's difficult because when we're in offices and you got that strange phone call or the odd email, your buddy across the office might look at you and go, "You okay? You look a bit strange." You go, "Well, actually that was an odd phone call, or that was a difficult email." But like Tim, I just had an email of someone saying that Laura needs me to change this invoice. Does that sound right to you? All that's gone. It's gone because we're all sitting in bedrooms and home offices and kitchens. And so it's even more important now for us to have these online communities to check up on people, to understand what makes, someone's vulnerable, and that they can talk to the teams. Because without that, the people who really get to know them well and get to understand when someone's down or busy or whatever it needs to be for us to get through are going to be the criminals. So the answer is you can't throw money at it. You have to understand your people. We absolutely need the tech, because the tech limits what I can do. It limits the amount of contact I have with people for a start. So, if I was talking to a company, I was interviewed by a company just the other day, and they've got technology that stops spoof numbers, for example. So that stops one avenue, and then maybe limiting what people can do once they log on. That's another avenue. So all that tech is great, as well as working with humans. And really, that's the only answer is the people. The people are the question, and they're the answer.
I think that's a great finishing point for this podcast, Jenny. Jenny, it's been so good to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And you also have your own podcast as well. So do you want to tell our audience a bit more about that if they want to learn more about the human factor?
Oh, sure. So I'm really easy to find, funnily enough, on social media, and the People Hacker or People Hacker on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. And then we've got humanfactorsecurity.co.uk is my website, currently being revamped, and Human Factor Security Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and including some video episodes on YouTube.
That's awesome. And Jenny, as we finish up, we've got some quick fire questions for you. It's our way to get to know the humans on the Human Layer Security Podcast a little bit better.
I see. Okay.
So I'll ask you to finish the sentence. The biggest misconception in cybersecurity is?
Technology is the answer.
And the best piece of advice I was ever given was,
don't buy kitchen appliances.
Jenny, that's awesome. Thank you so much. It's been great to have you with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Stay safe, and thanks for having me on, Tim.
Thanks, Jenny. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.